So now that we have successfully created our GraphQL query for Arweave, we need to install the Arweave JavaScript SDK so that we can actually execute that GraphQL query onto the Arweave network using a gateway to run the GraphQL and return back our results in our app so that we can display them in our list. So the first thing we need to do is install Arweave via npm. So I'm going to bounce over to my Visual Studio environment, and I'm in the public square app. Let me just make sure I'm in the right folder. Cool. And now I'm just going to do npm install Arweave. And that will install the Arweave JavaScript library that we're going to use to make our GraphQL call. So now that we have that, we're going to do all of our Arweave calls in the API.js file. So if we open up API.js in the source lib directory, we're going to import Arweave from Arweave. And then what we need to do is initialize it and export it out so that it can be imported by our React application. So we do this by doing export const Arweave lowercase equals Arweave uppercase dotted init, and that's going to initialize our connection. And basically we need to provide a API config, and that API config will have a host, and this host will be arweave.net, and a port 443, and a protocol. And a protocol will be either HTTP or HTTPS. And since we're on the internet, it will be HTTPS. If you are running a gateway environment locally, you may have your port, not post, port, as 1984 and your protocol as HTTP because you're kind of running it locally. But since we're going to connect to the main net, we're going to use port 443 and HTTPS. Cool. So to query the gateway in our code editor, we're going to open up the source app.js file, which is kind of our main React app entry point, and we're going to import two functions. We're going to import our build query function that we worked on earlier, and we're going to import Arweave from .lib/API. And now we're going to work on this get post infos function, and we're going to call our build query function to get our GraphQL query. And then we're going to execute a post to the Arweave gateway, passing in the query. And we'll just kind of log out the results that we get so that we can see that. So this is kind of step one of getting it into our React application. So let's go ahead and get our query. And then let's get the results by calling await arweave.api post GraphQL. So we're doing a post on the GraphQL endpoint. When we ran our playground, we just opened the GraphQL endpoint. But when you submit a query, you actually do a post, and then we're going to send as the body our GraphQL query. Let's go ahead and catch any errors here using .catch, and we'll just print to the console if the query fails. And we'll throw the same error back so that it will continue to error out. Now that we have our post to the Arweave gateway, let's go ahead and grab what comes back. And what's kind of confusing, but when we return a response, it's going to come back as the shape of the GraphQL response that we specified here. So we've got edges, node, etc. And we want to get these edges, but it'll come back as data.transactions.edges and then an array of node objects. So this result response will be data.transaction.edges, but what happens is Arweave's API post puts that in a data object. So it's going to be results. Let me just make this plural. Dot data dot data dot transactions dot edges. Right? So that could be a little confusing because you got to do data, but essentially the response coming back is going to be put into a data object, and then it's going to map whatever GraphQL output is designed to do, data, transactions, edges. So that's something to remember. And now we're just going to console log our edges, which we should be getting back an array of nodes based on our query. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to save the import of Arweave here in the export. And we are running our app. So let's go ahead and open a browser tab with this current version. So we'll open that, and cool, it's running. We don't see any results because we haven't made the code to show the results on the screen, but we should be able to open our console here, web developer tools, and okay, we got an error. So that's good. That means that our function is being called. So results.data.data is undefined. Let's see what's going on. Let's go into app.js. We said results await arweave.api post. We just installed it. So let's go ahead and rerun our app here since we did npm install, because that could be a problem. And then let's refresh that, and let's see. Okay. So we still get the same error. So let's go back to our code editor, and let's just console log query. I think I know what the problem is. I think I'm injecting it as an object, and I think I just need to just do that. Because when I call build query, it's probably given me an object or a body. And let's refresh. There we go. So I'm printing that out. See, it's already given me the query object or the body that I should call. So that's why we had that error. And now if we go and refresh, we get our array of 100, and each item in the array is a node. and that node contains, all the kind of header information of our Arweave transaction. It contains our tags, our owner, our data, and our block height information. So pretty cool. So that is our call to Arweave to get a GraphQL result. So now what we need to do is essentially convert these nodes into post info objects. And post info objects will basically be formatted in a nice object that it makes it easier for us to manage in our app through our business logic. So the first step to doing that is we'll want to go back into source lib API.js, and we'll look at this create post info function. This create post info function basically takes a node, and then it extracts all the metadata from the node and creates this post info object and returns that. So this is going to be our kind of transform. So we're going to get all our data from the GraphQL endpoint, and then we're going to map over this function and transform it into some objects that make sense. So that's pretty cool. So let's wire that up. And to do that, we need to go over back to our app.js file. And in our import line, we need to include create post info in our import. And we need to return edges.map. And map takes a function. So as it iterates through each item in the array, we're going to get the first item, which is an edge. And then we're going to call create post info edge.node, and that's going to map over and transform all of these transactions into post info objects, right? So that's cool. We hit save, and let's go ahead and run and make sure we don't get any errors. So now that we have this create post infos, returning post infos, we need to set up React to handle that. And we're going to do that using some state. So we're going to go into our app. Let's see. We're going to go into, let's see, what component are we going to go into? Our app component, right? So our app component, here's use effect, and it's calling get post infos. What we want to do is set up a flag to kind of show that the process is making a call out. So we show kind of a is searching kind of animation, and we need to do that. And we also need to kind of store our post info. So we need to create two use state hooks for is searching and post info. So we'll say const is searching, and we'll say set is searching, and that's going to be equal to use state, and we'll say false. So we'll default it to false. And then we're going to set up another hook, called post infos and set post infos. And we're going to say use state and empty array. So we'll default that post infos to an empty array and is searching to false. And now in our use effect hook right here, let's make sure we have use state set up from React. Let's do use state like that. There we go. All right. So the first thing we want to do is call set is searching to true. Set is searching to true. And then we're going to call get post infos. And then we're going to use .then because we can't do an async here. So we're going to use .then and we'll get our post. And then we're going to call set post infos with the post. And then we're going to say set is searching to false to toggle off the spinner, if you will. All right. And now use effect is a hook that you can use several different ways. In this way, we're using it to essentially fire on the on mount or the on component mount. And by doing that, we give it an empty array as a second argument. So the first argument takes the function to execute, and there's certain rules that have to be applied with that, like it can't be an async function and other things. And then the second function or argument is to add a list of variables essentially to watch on the component. If those change, then trigger this during a re-render. If they don't, then don't. By adding an empty array means it'll just trigger on the component mount. If you didn't supply a second argument, it would trigger every time state is re-rendering. So we want to remember to include that empty array when we do this, and that should be good. Now when we call set post infos, they're going to be placed in this post info object, and we also have this in searching flag. So in our app component, as we return, we want to pass these attributes to our home component so it can use them. So we'll say is searching equal to is searching, and post infos equal to post infos, like so. So that way we can kind of pass this data down to a child component, and then that child component can do something with it. And we'll head down to our child component called home, which is down below here. And right now, home is just returning the header home. We want to basically add below that header a couple of lines. So we want to say props dot is searching, and we're just going to do kind of a test. If that's true, then include progress spinner, and if it's false, it'll hide that progress spinner. And the progress spinner is just a little line that goes across that indicates that something's happening in the background. And then the second thing is we want to include our post component, and we're going to pass down further our infos, and they're from props post infos. So these two lines in the home should actually now have us actually show some data on our React app. I'm pretty sure the post infos is wired up, but it may not be. but let's check it out. Let's go ahead and run our browser app, and let's see. Oh, there we go. We are getting some data. Pretty cool. Um, so by, you know, setting up this get post infos function where we call the build query, we actually execute the request on the GraphQL server. And then in our component, we add some state to manage that. And then in the React use effect, on mount, we actually set the flag to show some animation. So if we look up here and we refresh, we should see some animation super fast, which is nice. It's nice to be fast. Then we get our post infos, and then when we get them, we turn off the animation and we pass all of that down from our home component into our post component to display those. Now, you may notice that we're not showing any actual content, and I believe I mentioned before, we're just getting the header. So we actually have to make a call to get the content, um, for each item in the list, each post info. And to do that, we're going to essentially in our API file. So if we head back to our API file in this create post info function, after the post info object, we're going to make a call. And the first thing we're going to do is just set up a request as null as part of that object to default. And then we're going to say if post info dot length post info dot length, right, is greater or less than 1048. So we want to do this check. So if someone, because it's a public network, someone could post data that's like 2 GB of plain text, and that, well, that's great. We don't want to read that. So we're going to just look for posts that have a size of less than 1048 characters, and then we're going to go post info dot request, and we're going to set it to, and this is where we're going to make a call to the gateway to return the data of that transaction. So we're going to call Arweave dot API dot get, and we're going to get our node.id, which is the transaction ID. And we're going to say, you know what? We want you to get this, but if it takes more than, 10 seconds, then, don't, fall back. And we'll do a catch on that fallback. And we'll say post info dot error equals timeout loading data, right? And then in this else, we want to say post info dot error data is too large. Okay. So that function will actually, and you'll notice we're not doing a wait here. So what's gonna happen is this request will actually be a function, and then that function will have to be invoked lazily inside our component. So if we save that, we're probably not going to see any changes here right off the, oh, there we go. We do. So we are invoking that lazily in the component, which is very cool. Let's take a look at that, how we're binding it. Let's go to our components folder and go to post. And you see we have the post, and then we map all the post infos that we got from our home component. And we essentially call this post item component, and we're setting the key because when you do a collection in React, you want to set a unique key so that it can properly, render or optimize the rendering of the items or children. So if one of them changes, it doesn't re-render the whole list again. So that key element's pretty important. And the nice thing is we've got a unique ID with our transaction ID for that. And let me go back really quick. So yeah, we have TXID doing node I okay, just making sure. And then we have our post info. So we pop our post info into this post item component, and we've got some state here. Then we also are grabbing the message. So here's this get post message, which is a sync, and we're doing an await to our post info request node. And then we get the response and we check the response to see that it's not an error. And if it isn't, we're basically calling props.postinfo.message equals response data to string and showing that message. And that shows our text here for our public square app, which is pretty cool. Another interesting note is up here, line 16, we're using a little optimization trick where we're getting the length and we're adding a bunch of S's to the length. And as it paints each item, since it's lazily loading the content, this can kind of pre-fill the height of the content so you don't get, kind of a lot of kind of janky view when it's like showing the list of items and then showing the content. So that's kind of neat. And there's one more optimization that we can do. Um, what if we kind of delayed the request so that we can, give it a little bit more time to kind of pull all those contents out. So we can do that by adding a delay results function in our API library. So if we go into the API library where, let's see, okay. So we want to go back to our app library and in our get post infos, we can actually use this utility function delay results, and we can say for 100 milliseconds, let's delay the actual painting of the results on the screen, and we can pull that from our API here. Okay, save. And that just adds a little bit of optimization there so that it waits like 100 milliseconds before it actually shows the content so that, the first kind of 10 items are already there. So you're just not getting a lot of jank in your screen. Okay. So if you're new to React and you're looking at this use effect function here, you can see that it's probably one of the most complicated ones in the app. And maybe we can walk through it really quickly, try to give you an idea of what's going on. So we've got, use state up here for post message and status message. And then we have this use effect. And as before, we said the second argument contains the items that we want to re-render this use effect on change. And in the app component, we had an empty array because we only wanted to run it at the beginning. With this use effect component, we want to run it every time a post info changes. And by having this key up here, that's going to just render this component for the specific item when that item changes. So with the post info, when it changes, we're going to re-render this use effect. And then the use effect is going to essentially start a message status of loading, and then it's going to call asynchronously the function that we passed in the request, which is the arweave.api.get function. So we're going to call a wait on that, and we're going to make sure we get a response. If we don't, we're going to send the error, right? So if there's no response, then we're going to send the post info error, or apply that as our status, right? And if there is a response, we're going to check and see if it's a 200 or a 202. And then we're going to show the message, clear the new status message on the screen. And then we're going to check if it's canceled. And then we're going to set, if it's canceled, we return. So we don't set the status message or the post message. Otherwise, we set them. And then we call get post message here to initiate all of that functionality. And on a return, we're returning a function, and that function will say is canceled equal to true when invoked. Okay. So that's a lot of code, but hopefully I was able to explain it a little bit better. Um, and as you do more and more React, you'll get familiar with some of these patterns. Okay, so that really connects us to the GraphQL query, and in the next session, we'll actually get to really the heart of the series of actually using a Near wallet to connect to our application and send a post into Arweave.